Hello, everyone. It's Professor Cruz again, and I want to welcome you to week 2 of our 6-week class. This week, we're talking about critical thinking, and we're starting our critical thinking application process, which is going to be a 4-part assignment series over the next 3 weeks. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about how Module 2 is set up. I'm going to talk about the specifics for the assignment, and then I'm actually going to even get to some content type discussion stuff that's going to help you with this week's assignment and even do like a little demo for you. So if you bear with me, if the video might be a little on the longer side, but it's certainly going to be worth it for the information that is presented to you in it to kind of help while you're working on your own in this online environment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. So what you'll see here is the course, and we're in module 2 because the way this is set up is that I've set it up so we're basically doing one module for each of our 6 weeks, excluding that little zero 0.5 module that got us started last week. And so this week, this is going to be a kind of the typical rundown of what a week's going to look like. I know it looks like a lot, but again, we're doing 16 weeks in 6. So we have a little over like a third of the time that we would normally do it. So things kind of get stacked up. Again, if you follow the order I've laid out in this outline thing, I think this is the order in which it makes the most sense. It might not be the most visually appealing, but I think it helps for breaking down the week. As some of you have already seen, the discussion post opened up at midnight last night. There's even a couple responses on there right now. You're not seeing them because I'm in student mode. You have to do your response first before you can view the board. So that way your answer is not influenced by the ones that you've seen your classmates do. Basically, what you're going to do, 200 words minimum, no AI programs at all allowed on this. So make sure if you're using any programs you're not aware of, ask me first and I'll let you know if they're okay or not. But no generative AI, so like no Grammarly optimized, no Microsoft Copilot, no Chat GPT and the such. This is just you and your response. The way these are set up, though, I mean, there's not really a right or wrong answer. It's your opinion, how you would defend that opinion, trying to think in this ethics environment of right or wrong and how you can, explain things to people a way which would be difficult for them to reasonably reject, right? You'll hear me say that a lot this semester. So really, there shouldn't be any reason to use any of those assistive things or cheating things. It's conversational. I mean, you want it to be like it's college writing, but it shouldn't be written like it's Shakespeare here, right? It's a conversation with your classmates about your opinion. So put the temptation aside and just do the work yourself, okay? 200 words by Tuesday night, answering the prompt, is it okay to put your dog waste bag in your neighbor's trash can? Okay. Then what you'll do by Tuesday night, you'll go and you'll respond to 2 classmates with 75 words minimum each. And you're going to do this in a way that opens a conversation, a dialogue with those people. So, like, those of you who did your video assignments, I think you did a really great job with that. And that'll get us ready for doing video assignments for the final. With the replies, they were pretty good. And you guys did a decent job replying back and forth with one another. But some people, they did do hey, I really like your ideas. They were great. That's a little bland, guys. Like, if you like somebody's ideas, tell them what specifically you liked and why. Okay, say, I like what you said about this because this and blah, 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 and that. Don't just say, hey, great job, because I'm not going to give full points to that because that's a little generic for college, okay? Let's have a conversation with one another. So put some thought into these replies. Now, I don't want you going out here and, trying to like start fights with each other, but challenge each other intellectually, respectfully, and have conversations, okay? Remember, in the world of ethics, you guys can disagree and still do it politely, and it's not a problem because there's many ways to get to right and wrong. So the way this is set up, like I was saying, Sunday night the question goes live. By Tuesday at midnight, you need to have your original response, the first one. By Thursday, you need to reply to your 2 classmates. And by Saturday night, you need to respond to everybody who did a reply on your post, and that would include me. Okay, and so I'm going to jump in and ask questions to you guys too, just like I would in the classroom. If you would say something, I'm like, well, what about this, and how do you feel about that? One thing I want to tell you guys, I will play devil's advocate. I'll do it, like, again, respectfully. I'm not trying to challenge you or call you out, but if it sounds like I'm disagreeing with you, it's just because I'm trying to help you make a strong argument. I might, in actuality, agree with you, but like, I can't teach you how to make a strong argument if you say something and I'm just like, yes, that's great, you're awesome, gold star. It might be great and awesome, but I'm going to still try to challenge you to make it better. Okay. And this is what, for the next 5 weeks, the structure like of our um, discussion posts are going to be weekly. This is what simulates the kind of interactions we would have had in a classroom. Okay. So then once you've done that, the next thing you would want to do is kind of read over the general module overview. And then you're going to have the chapter 3 smart book quiz, which covers the what is it? Critical thinking, fallacies, logical fallacies, stuff like that. The logical fallacies are definitely important because it's good to spot faulty arguments. There is actually an extra credit assignment that goes with like fallacies in social media. So if you want to check that out in the extra credit Dropbox, that's one you could get started on for extra credit, if you wanted to get a head start on that. The chapter 4 smart book quiz, I think it's pretty short because it's really just about the question of the stages of the critical thinking application process. And then the video I'm making now will be in here. This is kind of meta because if you're watching this video, that means you found this. But either way, that's where it's going to be. So that's kind of like a placeholder right now. And then this is the case study that we're using for our critical thinking application process. So the case study, this is like a kind of real life example of a situation where we would maybe want to look at what's the ethical thing to do. The way this is going to work is, we're going to use this case study to get started this week to kind of identify what's going on. Then next week, we're going to apply, act utilitarianism to it to see what a utilitarian would do to resolve the situation ethically. Then the next week, we would pick, we're going to apply Kant's deontology to it and see what a deontologist would do to ethically resolve the situation. The reason why we're picking act utilitarianism and Kant's deontology isn't because they're the two best. We're going to look at 8 theories. They all have value. They all have pros and cons. By no means are we trying to make you utilitarians or deontologists, but we're picking these two because they are the most diametrically opposed, if you will. Okay, one of them, act utilitarianism, is a consequential ethical theory, which you'll read about next week. And so consequential ethics is essentially, the outcome dictates whether or not you did good or bad. So if you've ever heard the phrase like the ends justifies the means, ends is a goal, means is a tool that's used to get there. The British were fond of this phrase, during like the revolutionary times. So like, if you've seen the movie like Patriot, obviously it's dramatized, but like if you burn down a church with like townspeople in it and the townspeople stop revolting against you, then like the ends justify the means. If you don't like that, then it just means you're not a utilitarian. Utilitarianism has its time, its place. We'll get into that, obviously. So, but the idea is if the outcome is good and favorable for the most amount of people, what you did to get there was fine. There aren't as many like hard, fast moral rules, if that makes sense. Like you could lie as long as the lie produced a good. In fact, Plato called that a noble lie, right? A lie for the good of the people. He saw that as like, okay, Whereas Immanuel Kant, he's a non-consequentialist. He would never approve of lying because lying is bad intent. So what's the opposite of consequentialism? It's non-consequentialism. So this isn't the outcome that justifies the actions, but it's the actions themselves. Okay, so it's like the actions have to be good. The outcome we can't always control, but we control what we do in the process. Therefore, lying we know is malintent because it's meant to deceive, so it would be different. So this is why in this case, we're just going to look at it from two completely different lenses, right? If you get the same answer for both, you probably did it wrong. Okay, like there's slim cases where I could see how you fit it into both theories properly, but that's like I've seen that like twice in like 5 years of doing this. The idea is they should be different outcomes. That way you can think logically between the two and pick the one that's most best. And then that's the last assignment, right? So the last assignment is you're going to pick one of those two. You're going to say why it's the best option to take. You're going to evaluate it against potential counter arguments. And then you're going to reflect on the whole process, okay? So this is the case study that you will use for the next 4 assignments. That's what I have up there in that big purple bold. I don't know how this happens, but every semester, 1 or 2 people like make up their own case. Don't do that. If you put it into AI, it's going to make up the wrong thing, so don't do that. This is the case we're using. We're all using it. This comes from the National High School Ethics Bowl. I'm the coach of the ethics debate team here at the college, and so we do the Regional Collegiate Ethics Bowl. I'm also a judge on the high school ethics bowl competition that we host every year somewhere around January, February. And so I take the cases from those competitions because I think they come up with some interesting cases. So I've credited it down there at the bottom just so because it is their intellectual property. But you're going to read this case and then do the assignment, okay? And now I'll give you some advice that Dr. Joyce Carpe, one of my literature professors at USF, told me. This was about reading Shakespeare, but I think it's good for advice for anything, instructions or any kind of materials that you're really trying to learn. She would say read it 3 times. The first time to kind of take it all in, the second time to cut through the language, the third time to pick up any of the little details you missed. What I mean by that is just don't rush through this and then just jump into the assignment. Really take your time, look at it, see what you're working with, print it out and have it on a piece of paper if you want to. But make sure you fully understand the case before you get started because it's going to affect how you do the assignment, okay? So once you've read the case and you feel confident that you know what's going on, then you're going to move on to the assignment itself. Now, the assignment in here, it tells you that you are going to do this assignment in 3 parts: the identification, the research, and the analysis chart. So again, read through this multiple times, make sure you know what's going on. I have an example I'm going to show you. So I know this looks like a lot, but I'm not going to go through it line by line because that would be a long and dubious kind of video here. But I'll give you the brief overview. So in the identification, we're trying to come up with the main moral issue. And that's a should or a what should question about how the decision maker should try to resolve the situation. So when you're reading this case, I want you to think about who needs to make a decision in this case. That's my decision maker, and the rest of this thing is going to hinge off that. And I'm going to do an example for you guys in a minute. So if it feels like I'm rushing through this part, don't worry. I'm going to give you an example, and it's going to make sense, okay? But this is where we're just establishing the question we want to answer. Because if you remember for chapter 1, ethics is the should questions. It's what we ought to do. It's what we should do. It's what's permissible. That's what we want to get to. In a perfect vacuum, what would the right thing to do be, okay? And we're going to state that claim, okay? Then we'll get to the research. I'm not going to make you do the research. We don't have time for it. But I want you to identify 3 areas of research that you think the decision maker could do that would help them get to, a way to address this issue, come up with some options, things that they could take, but information they would need to try to make a decision in the situation. And just tell me where they would find that information and how it would help them, in the process. Okay. So just read through those instructions there. Now, the part that everybody finds, a little intimidating at first is you have to create a chart that has very specific things on it. So the chart is going to have the stakeholders, which you'll read about in chapter 4. It'll have the options the decision maker can take, which you'll also read about in chapter 4. And then it'll have how everybody's affected by those options. Okay. And so it seems like a lot, but you'll see I've given you a tool to do this on your own without having to like come up with a chart. I've like given it to you, so I think that'll help you out. But I'll show you like what you're looking to do for this situation here to like get it set up in the proper format that we're looking for. It also has, an example of this same thing in chapter 4 with like, I think it's like Katrina or something. She's got like a whistleblower type situation or whatever. So there's an example in there that you can find in the textbook as well. But read over these instructions. Make sure you look through the submission checklist. Make sure you're hitting all these things. You also need to understand that when you submit it to the Dropbox, it will go through CopyLeaks for AI and plagiarism and detection. And that report will be made available to you after I've released the grade on the assignment. Okay. So be sure not to use, again, any generative AI programs that would hit that, and definitely don't plagiarize anything, which you wouldn't really need to do for this because this is all kind of basically your opinion on how you see the situation. So it'd be weird if 30 of you turned in the exact same thing, because there should be variation. We're using the same case, we're using the same theories, but there's kind of an infinite, glitch, if you will, of different ways that this thing can be approached based off of the uniqueness of the person doing the assignment. Okay. So once you understand the instructions, then you go on to the next document, which is a document that you can use to kind of just fill in, okay, the situation, okay? Sorry. Ooh. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to use this to fill out the assignment. Now, I think I just noticed something. Hold on. Yes. Okay. So I have to put I put an older version of that document in there. So bear with me. Because it does talk about here, you have to list 5 secondary ethical issues. And these are the is it right questions that kind of undergird your main moral issues. So like the main moral issue is one thing, and these are just like anybody else anything you could say about in the case. Okay. And I'll talk about that when I show you my example. So I will make sure that I get the right document in there before you guys get started. This is just an older version that didn't have that on there. I am in Google Chrome right now, and so you can see this and it's visible and it's nice. I have noticed that when I go to Firefox, it comes up just as black pages. And so if your window browser isn't like supporting the document and you don't see it, that's fine, because it's just to look at. What you really want to do here is click here and download it. So when you click on this, it downloads it in a MS Word document, which then you can open up. And the idea is make it easy on yourself and kind of just fill this thing in as you go. So you kind of just enable editing, and then, you come in here and you kind of fill things out. Like you put your name here because, you're not Wolverine. You change the date. You fill in your stuff. You see, it's kind of telling you what to do. And then it's really cool because then it's got the chart for you. So I have to just like delete this stuff in the chart and like fill in your decision makers, fill in your options. Take this out like before you submit it. Don't like leave that in. But what this is telling you here is I've got it set up for just 4 and 4 because that's easy, but you might have more than 4 stakeholders, and I think looking at the case, I can definitely see more than 4. So the idea is you want to look at, like, there's people who are directly mentioned, and you might even see people, that would be inferred, based off of the stakeholder groups that aren't necessarily mentioned in the exact document. So you want to make sure you get at least all the stakeholders that you see mentioned in the case, but then also think about, is there anybody else that's like logically included in this now? And so if you need to add more rows, what you can do is you just right click in one of these boxes, you go to insert, and you go insert row below, and it just pops another row in. And so again, right click, insert rows below, and it'll add another. You just do that as much as you need to, and then before you turn it in, delete that so it looks good. Okay, and then when this is done, save it and submit it to the assignment. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure that is my screen still sharing? I don't see the box anymore. I hope it is. Sorry, guys. What you want to do is make sure you pay attention and you turn in the correct copy, because like every semester it happens where somebody just turns in the format and then it's like, trust me, bro, I did it on time. And it's like, well, I don't know if you did it on time. I don't know if you're empty boxing me and just putting in there to buy you more time. So it's your responsibility to make sure that your assignment is in there on time, that you click it, you check it, the submission, and make sure the file's sent. Because once the deadline comes, if you've got a blank document in there, I mean, that's your submission. And, I don't do late work. So we want to make sure we get it in, take the responsibility and the personal accountability to make sure that you have this thing, done correctly. Okay. So, sorry, I'm doing these things unedited because it would take forever. So you just have to go with, you get the real live classroom experience here on real, raw, and unedited, right? So once you fill this out, you go back to the assignment and you upload it as your file. Okay. And then when it's done, it's done. Okay. And the next thing you do once you have that assignment in, you will then do your chapter 16 smart book quiz. Okay. And these just look weird because I'm in student mode, but I don't have like student credentials, so it's not showing me what you would see. You would see the launch button, right? And once you get through all that to the chapter 16 quiz, you're done for the week. So order of importance, follow that module down the way I've got it listed, because I think, like I said, that's the best way to go about it. Just work it one at a time till you get to the end. Okay. Now what I want to do real quick is I want to talk about this critical thinking application process and kind of like give you the little razzle dazzle on what we're doing here, because I think that'll help you out. Okay. So you see the critical thinking model, it's in chapter 4. So while you're working on this, you want to have chapter 4 open in a tab somewhere. You want to have like my video open in a tab somewhere, all the resources that you can have available to you. So you're working through it and you're doing this as like stress-free as possible, because it will be a bit overwhelming the first time you do the process, but as you work it and you go through it, you'll see that if you're doing it correctly, you're being diligent about it, it all kind of falls in place. So what you'll see in the chapter 4 are the steps of the critical thinking model. And so it's a 7-step process: identification, research, analysis, application, decision-making, evaluation, and reflection. These 7 steps will make up the next 4 assignments. The first assignment is identification, research, and analysis. So we're doing these 3 things this week. Next week and the week after, we're splitting 4 into 2 separate assignments. One, we're applying act utilitarianism. The other, we're applying constant ontology. And then finally, the last assignment will be 5, 6, and 7. We're doing that together. But we're making our decision, evaluating, reflecting on the process. Okay. So this week, we're doing identification, research, and analysis. So we're starting off with the identification. And what do we mean by that? We're trying to get down to the should or what should question that we are trying to solve, in this case. And you could do this with anything in ethics, right? Like this week's question is about the dog waste. I could have written that as, should you throw your dog waste in your neighbor's trash can? Okay. Should Dr. Martin Luther King break the parade law? I think that was even mentioned in chapter 1, right? Like he has this option. Or what should Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do about the parade law? Okay. What should I do with my dog's waste after he's left it in the grass, right? So these are how we pose questions in ethics. If you go further in ethics and philosophy, you might hear the phrase permissible, like, is it permissible or not? And that just means, do we have permission to do it? We stick with should and what should, like how other things ought to be. And I always tell people ought is just like an antiquated way to say should. Okay. So that's what we're trying to get to. And two, for the research, we're just trying to figure out what information we need and how that would help them in the process, them being our decision maker. Okay. And then for analysis, we need to analyze the problem, and we do that by breaking it down into the smaller parts. And so those smaller parts are what I was just talking about. Who's my decision maker? So, like, let's say we're doing Dr. King as the example, like Dr. King's my decision maker. What are possible options he could do? He could break the law. He could adhere to the law. He could appeal the law. He could have the meeting somewhere in private, like a church, where he wouldn't be banned. Like, these are all four potential options that he could take to resolve that issue. And then we would run the analysis in the application process to see which of those he should do. And that would be dependent upon, the theories and how they're applied and things like that. But that's how we would start to go through the process. And so then we're going to apply, and what we're going to apply are ethical standards and frameworks, general moral principles to see what the should statements of ethics are. So we're starting with a should question. Should Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. break the parade law? And by the end, we're going to have a should statement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. should break this parade law, or should not break the parade, whichever way we're going to go with it, right? Remember, there's not an answer I'm looking for any of these. I just want to see you work a process correctly and get to the answer that theory says you should get to. So once we've done that, then we're going to decide what's the best outcome, the best resolution. And then we got to use reason, courage, and character to do that. Now, the first thing I would tell you about, you're going to read about biases in the chapter. The first thing you guys have to do is you have to put personal bias aside. You have to put confirmation bias out of your head. The biggest mistake that students make on these assignments, they read the case and they make an opinion right away. And I'm going to ask you not to do that. Because if you have an outcome in your head already, then what's the point of working the process? The point of this process is to take a step back, analyze the facts, think about it ethically and logically, taking emotions out of it. Emotions are good, feelings are good, but they have their time and their place. And in ethics, we have to put those things aside sometimes, because sometimes the right thing is a hard thing, okay? And we have to think logically about doing that in the moment. And so if you have an outcome in your head while you're making your chart, it'll be noticeable. I'll see it. I'll see that you're trying to bias the chart. That's more next week kind of thing. What I always tell people, if you don't like the act utilitarian decision, that's fine. You'll probably like the Kantian decision. If you like the act utilitarian decision, you're probably not going to like the Kantian decision, because they're conflicting with one another, okay? But it's not about what you personally think, feel, or want. It's about what does the theory tell us to do, okay? So you want to hold off your biases in this process. When you get started, every option should have the chance to be the correct answer. Once we've made our decision, we're going to evaluate that decision, and we're going to see if it holds up under scrutiny. If we truly did come up to the correct answer, and if we could fairly logically defend our decision against scrutiny. This is again where I'll use that phrase. It comes from T.S. Scanlon's book, What We Owe Each Other. If you've ever seen The Good Place, they talk about that book throughout the series, and Eleanor has it in the final episode. I always like to say the way it act towards each other, in which it's difficult for one to reasonably reject. The difference is we can rationally reject things that aren't reasonable, if that makes sense. So, like, if I owned a plot of land and I had a water source, and you were my neighbor, and you came to me and you said, "Hello, neighbor, I don't have any water at my house, and I wanted to know if I could get some from you." And I was like, "Well, no, I mean, it's my property. I can do what I want with it. And I choose not to give you the water because I might need it for later." That's a rational explanation. That's certainly how property law would work. But again, remember, we talked about Dr. King last week. Ethics and law aren't always the same thing. So, yes, that is a logical, rational explanation of my property rights. But you, as the person who needs water to, like, I don't know, live, could rationally or reasonably reject that. Okay. Does that mean you win and I fold and give you water? Not necessarily, but you would have a way to reasonably reject that. And then if you countered and said, well, listen, I'll pay you for the water, I'll pay you for the infrastructure to get to my house. And we can even think of like some sort of like meter fee usage. So I know I don't use too much water, so that way you will have it, the resource for later on if you need it. And they still say no, then that's an irrational rejection to my reasonable position. So does that make sense? Like you want to make it to where if they say no, they have to do it like illogically or like fallaciously because you've laid it out so perfectly that it's difficult for them to reject it reasonably. You know, you can rationalize anything. Some of the worst things in human history were rationalized in the time, but weren't reasonable. That doesn't mean rationale is wrong. I mean, it has its time and place, but like anything in academics, there's different versions of the same thing, if that makes sense. And so we're talking about a rational explanation versus a reasonable explanation. And I think that helps you against the scrutiny, right? And then finally, we're going to do the reflective piece. And we're just going to make sure we made the correct decision. Like, did we identify the problem correctly? Did we address it? Did we find an option that's going to work? Did our personal assumptions, values influence the decisions, bias, etc.? Okay. So now let's see what this looks like. So I'm going to kind of show it to you guys, and then you can try it on. So we have a situation here, and I've been borrowing this for years off of Dr. Otatula when he first demonstrated this process to me. These are our people involved, right? So we have a guy named Bob, and Bob has a wife, and Bob and his wife, Mary, have Timmy as a child. However, Mary has a boyfriend, Steve, and George is the neighbor that lives next door to them. And George one day goes to Bob and says, hey, man, I think your wife is having an affair. Every day when you and Timmy leave, some guy comes over and he's gone before you get back. Obviously, he's a little upset, but Bob confronts his wife and asks if she's having an affair, and she is. Okay. So now the situation is Bob has this information. He needs to know what he should do. Okay. So I put myself in Bob's shoes and I think, what is the problem I need to identify? Well, should Bob divorce his wife, or what should Bob do about his wife's cheating? Both of these would be okay. I like the should question myself because the should question, when written correctly, should be able to be answered with a simple yes or no. Should Bob divorce his wife? Yes. Should Bob divorce his wife? No. It's a simple answer, yes or no, but it's the complexity of how we get to that simple answer is essentially what the project is. I like it because if you've written it correctly, it's a yes or no answer. If you can't answer it with yes or no, you've written the wrong kind of question. Don't lead the question with your bias and be like, should Bob divorce his wife considering this and that and the other thing, like where you're already like leaning us towards the answer, Just right now, everything has the option to be correct. But Bob's thinking, my wife cheated on me. Should I divorce her? Or what should I do about my wife's cheating? So the should question is answered with yes or no. The what should question is going to be answered with your options. Okay, if that makes sense. So for research, if I'm Bob, I would look up divorce law in Florida because I live in Florida. I would look up marriage counseling, and I would look like successive trial separations because maybe these are some of the things that I'm thinking about. So I don't need you to look all these things up. I don't want resources for these things. I just want you to give me 3 to 4 sentences about where I would search, like where your decision maker would search for that information and how it would help them come to a conclusion. Now, I just realized, is it right questions? Let me go back a bit. Sorry. This is your main question. So for the is it right questions, I would just think, is it right to, tell somebody else you think their spouse is cheating? Is it right to engage in a sexual relationship with somebody who is married? This is coming from the perspective of the boyfriend, right? Is it right to, be unfaithful to your spouse? You know what I mean? I would just think of these 5 if it right questions that kind of get me in the mindset to build me up to that big question. Okay. So then we've done the research part. And then we get to the analysis. Now, this is what your chart's going to essentially look like. We've identified Bob as the decision maker, so he goes first. The rest doesn't matter. The only ordering that matters is your decision maker needs to be on the first line. You got to make sure your decision maker matches the person and the question that you proposed. Because some people will be like, should Bob, divorce his wife? And then the first person they put in there is like the neighbor. No, Bob's a decision maker. We said it in the question. We put those together because we need to make sure that these options follow with what Bob can do. So we have Bob labeled as a decision maker, and we just put everybody else in a box. Now, in this one, it's pretty simple because it's only 1 or 2 people. Next week, I'll show you what to do when there's multiples because that doesn't really affect us till next week. Okay, but you might have a stakeholder as one person or a group of people, friends, family, coworkers, etc. It'll say in the chapter that a stakeholder is a person or an entity that represents people. So if you said like St. Petersburg College, you'd be talking about everybody associated with the college. So that'd be a large number, like 23,000 people, right? If you included students, okay? Parents, generally 2, right? Because it's plural. If it said parent, we'd be 1, right? You see, okay? So those are the kind of things to consider, but it can't be something generic like it says in the thing, like the environment can't be a stakeholder because it's not a thing, right? But people who interact with the environment then could be a stakeholder, you see? So make sure your stakeholders make sense logically, and then we have our 4 decisions. Make sure these decisions make sense. I mean, yes, you could put wild decisions. People always want to do like Bob could murder his wife. Yeah, technically that's an option, but it's not going to be an ethical one. Like none of the theories, even ethical egoism, would support that. So like, let's not try to do a throwaway. Let's try to be serious with our answers. Okay, so like Bob could do nothing. Bob could divorce his wife. Bob could ask his wife to go to counseling, and Bob could separate from his wife. Now, the do nothing option, everybody likes to throw that in. It's like, oh, do nothing. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you got to do something. In this case, the do nothing would be like, Bob's wife says, I'm cheating on you. And he's like, okay, well, that sucks. But I guess, I'm just going to kind of, whatever, we'll just stay together for the kid or whatever, like he's not really going to take any further action. And that is an option he can do. And then divorce his wife, asks to go to counseling. Yes, I know this is spelled wrong, but it's a PDF, so I can't change it. And then Bob could separate from his wife. So these are all things he can do. There's more things he can do. These are, if I were Bob, 4 things I would think about doing. You might think about other things, and that's where the uniqueness of this assignment comes in. Okay. Now, what's pretty cool about this is like there is like I think like a little algorithm that'll help you get to 4. Do the thing, don't do the thing. What's the compromise and what's like our nuclear option, right? Within reason, obviously. So like the yes or no question, the thing I like about the should question is if I say, should Bob divorce his wife, my first 2 options are implied. Bob should divorce his wife. Bob should not divorce his wife. You see? Then you just got to come up with 2 more. So the do nothing is kind of like the not divorce his wife. Should Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. break the Prague Law? He should break it. He shouldn't break it. See? I get my first 2 right out the gate just by the nature of the should question. Then I got to think of 2 others. Okay? So once I have that, then what's left is to fill in how they're affected. Now, don't give me a whole paragraph, but don't give me like happy, sad, mad. Like, give me like some thought. Show me if it's like if it's going to be all bad, all good, if it's a balance. I won't read each one for you. You can pause your screen and see what I want. But the idea here is we show how each person is affected by the option. So Bob could do nothing. If Bob did nothing, he'd feel bad that his wife was continuing to cheat on him. Mary would be happy that she could continue the affair, but could feel bad that Bob knows. See, there's like a good and bad. George, the neighbor, might feel bad, but wouldn't feel guilty that he broke up the marriage because like maybe now he's going to feel bad, like they get divorced. I told him, blah, blah, blah. The boyfriend would be happy that he could continue the affair with Mary, and like Timmy probably would not know anything was wrong and could continue with life as normal. You see what I'm saying? And then you do that for each one. Put yourself in their mindset. Don't put any bias in there. Don't think how you would feel if you were Timmy. We go off the context of what we know, and so far as we know, Timmy doesn't know anything, right? Make sure you look at the context in your case study about how everybody's affected, and try your best to go with like the clues you were given and imply how you would do that. So, like an example, a couple years ago, I had a student. We were in a case where it was, an elderly couple. One of the people were, so badly Alzheimer's that they didn't even recognize him anymore. Um, the husband had kind of like rekindled with like an old friend for support in the time and interest group, right? And people were telling him to move on because the wife didn't, remember him, and he didn't know if he should or not. His adult children encouraged him to pursue the relationship with the friends and be happy. Well, then the student puts like that they would be unhappy with that. And I said, well, how would they be unhappy when that's what they've expressed to us would be their best case scenario? They want dad to date the friend. So how would they would be happy, not unhappy. You see, so make sure we follow the context clues, okay, that we were given. And then once you do that, you're done. And you'll go do it. And then we'll pick up kind of from here next week, and we'll talk about the next stage of the process, applying act utilitarianism. But that'll be it. And so when you're doing this, definitely take your time. Watch this video as many times as you need. Make sure you use all your available resources, the chapter, the examples, all kinds of stuff. Use the downloadable document. And then if you need any help along the way, all you have to do is reach out, ask me through email. I'll do my best to give you any kind of guidance I can, but I hope this kind of helps. I like to do these videos as like supplemental instruction because I know it kind of stinks when you're online and you feel like you're on your own. A lot of people say that they enjoy watching the videos and having the explanation. So hopefully you find it useful. Sorry, a little bit back and forth and scatterbrain kind of stuff. That's just kind of how I am. But I always get back to where I need to be, I think. So if there's any questions afterwards, just let me know. If not, good luck with this week and getting everything done. And I look forward to seeing what you guys turn in. Bye.